Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Jazakallah khairan for attending. Today we have a very special guest speaker with us on the topic of evolution and atheism. So, Brother Subboor Ahmad, he is a speaker from IERA. He specializes in arguments for God existence and also tackles issues such as atheism and evolution. You can find a lot of his content on YouTube, and he's also known for being, a well-known debater online, and also you can find a lot of his content that he does at Hyde Park and various other places, inshallah. So we're going to have a talk, and then after that, inshallah, there will be a lot of, I know there's going to be a lot of questions, so we'll have a lot of time for Q&A as well, inshallah. So without any further ado.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulillah, Ahmad. I want to start off with a story. So I want you to actually imagine this story, because this is something which you'll only enjoy if you've been through something like this, or if you know somebody that's been through a situation like this before. So imagine you move out of High Wycombe and you move to Oxford. And when you've moved to Oxford, you're really happy, you have a brand new house, you're newly married, and you have everything, you have your new job, you have everything, right? So you're in this new place, you're enjoying this new environment, you spend the whole weekend fixing up the house, taking stuff from High Wycombe, taking it to Oxford, putting all the shelves up, getting everything ready. Monday, you need to go to work. So Sunday night, as your packing is finished, as all your friends have come over and gone, as you're about to start your new life in this house, you look out the window and this is what you see. The next door neighbor has the world's scariest looking dog. It actually looks like a beast, something from maybe a science fiction story. You can see in the dark that this thing looks pretty damn scary. So what you do, you tell your wife, okay, I really don't like dogs. I'm actually really scared of dogs. I hope, this thing doesn't bite me. So what do? Monday morning, you wear your suit, you get ready, you open the door. As you open the door, you walk out, you hear the dog barking, you get scared, you run back in. Think to yourself, what am I going to do? This dog is scary and it's not even on a leash. So what you do, you wait a little while, you think, okay, I might be late for work, I'll just ring them, say to them, not feeling too well, is it okay if I come in a bit later, I've just got an issue I'm dealing with. Do that, yeah, fine, I'll come in at 12. 11 o'clock, you decide, open up the door, try and go out, the dog starts barking, you run back in. Think, what am I going to do? So you ring your boss again, you say, do you know what, I'm really, really sorry, I can't come in today, not feeling it, I've just got some issue I'm dealing with, can I please come in tomorrow? Your boss is like, you already took off so many days for your holiday, this is very unprofessional, make sure you're at work tomorrow and you also need to do overtime. So you're like, okay, fine. The next day, you wake up in the morning, you get ready, you play a halal version of The Eye of the Tiger, you think, I'm going to get out there, I'm going to walk in front of this dog, I don't care what it does. And that day, you open the door, you walk out, the dog comes, you run back in. And as you run back in, the dog barks so loud that actually, you think you can feel your heartbeat. That's how loud he actually barks. And you're actually literally shaken by this dog. So what you do, being the brave man that you are, you ask your missus to go to the back garden, maybe speak to the neighbor's wife, try and ask the guy to put the dog on a leash or something so that you can actually walk out your house. And your wife says, what's wrong with you? Are you a kid? It's just a dog. There's dogs all over the country. What are you worried about this for? Anyway, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, every single day the same thing happens. Till on Friday your boss says, do you know what? You're sacked. You're actually sacked. Your job is gone. Your wife says, I'm going off to my mum's. I don't care about the dog. So she walks out of the house, you're left in the house alone. The whole weekend you're so frightened You refuse to leave the house. And since you refuse to leave the house, you're hungry. And what are you going to do for food? There's nothing to do. So what you decide to do is you decide to order a pizza. And as you decide to order the pizza man comes to the door, knocks on the door, you open the door, and the dog comes running in towards you, you shut the door, and you say, leave the pizza, you just shout at him, you pass the money through a letterbox, and you go hungry that weekend. Imagine on Monday, you have lack of sleep, you just lost your job, your wife thinks you're a coward, your other friends are mocking you, you're hungry, you're tired. Monday morning, you think, do you know what? I don't care anymore. I just don't care anymore. I'm going to walk out there and I don't care what that dog does to me. You walk out the house, the dog comes running, you get scared, you close your eyes, he bites you. The dog's got no teeth. You just lost your job, lost your wife, lost your self-credibility, lost your sleep over a dog that doesn't even have teeth. The reason why I'm sharing this story is because this is the only way I can explain the experience that some people go through unnecessarily when it comes to atheism, evolution, God, science. They get so scared. Oh my God, it's all this stuff on the internet, there's all these articles, there's this happening and that happening. And they think their iman is being affected by these things, when it's literally harmless. It's literally nothing. People are losing their sleep over nothing, and people are getting worried over nothing. I had a really strange experience. I wish I could show the message that we actually received. There's this guy who contacted IERA, and he was like, this is when the Higgs boson, this thing that they call the God particle, was discovered. He contacted IERA, and he was like, brothers, my iman is gone. My iman is gone. They discovered the God particle. He was shaken. He didn't know how to pray. Do you know why they called it a God particle? Does anyone know why they called it the God particle? There was a particular particle that physicists were looking for, and they couldn't find this particle, so they called it the goddamn particle. And over time, goddamn as in we can't find this particle, they decided to start calling it the God particle. That's what it was. And this guy claims he nearly lost his iman because of some article he read about the God particle. And, we contacted him, we said to him, bro, chill out. It's just a particle they discovered. What are you worried about? And the reason why I'm sharing these stories is because I've been involved in the field of Dawah for a few years now, and I've seen this amongst our youth. I've seen this even amongst grown men in our community. I've seen this amongst Christians, amongst other people. They freak out over something which is so trivial. Now, I want to share something. 2017 now, I think this was 2010. I used to work here in High Wycombe. This used to be my local mosque. And in High Wycombe, I used to work near, I don't know if it's still there, Roosters. I didn't work in Roosters. I used to work near Roosters. So near Roosters, there used to be an internet cafe and a gaming shop. I don't know if it's still there. But there you go. Someone's nodding. It's actually there. There's only one brother who actually knows about it. So I remember back in those days, internet wasn't really on your phone. Access to email and stuff like this, you'd basically have to go to internet cafes. We used to use internet cafes a lot back then. And I remember after work one day, I basically went over to the internet cafe and used the internet, checked some of my emails. And there was a guy who I used to see regularly because he owned that gaming shop, and I was also into games back then as well. So I went over to the counter, paid him for whatever, and then I said to him, just the conversation started going. He's quite a friendly guy. I said to him, do you believe in God? And he looked at me, and I still remember that look with those, that stare of certainty. He said, I believe in science. And it was such a weird response. It was such a weird response because I thought to myself, imagine if I ask you, do you believe in the moon? I just ask you a question. Do you believe the moon exists? And you reply, I don't like stamp collecting. Honestly. Now, that's actually the end of my lecture, because all the rest of this, what we're going to be doing from now on, is actually going to be, inshallah, one long conversation, because the only way we're going to get through this content is if you guys actually reply to me. The Q&A starts actually now. So, Bismillah. I believe in science, right? How many people have heard this before? Raise your hand. Okay, quite a lot of people. What on earth does that mean? Young man.
That some people, like, let's say that when the Big Bang happened, people don't refer as God's miracle, they refer to some chemical reaction or something.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
They believe that science and
Speak
religion,
louder, please.
They believe that science and religion can't go hand in hand.
They believe science and religion can't go hand in hand. Okay, good. Getting closer. Somebody else?
They believe that science has an explanation for everything and there's no longer a need for God.
Perfect. Wasif, right?
Yeah.
Wasif. Brother hit the nail on the head. They believe science explains everything. That's actually what they believe. So when they say, I believe in science, that's actually what they're saying. Now what I want to do is, I want to do a little experiment with you guys, okay? So let's actually go through some beliefs. Plato, okay? Ancient Greece. Plato. Okay, how many people here believe in Plato? Okay, some people didn't raise their hands. How many people believe in Genghis Khan? Okay, a lot more. Okay, fine. Forget Plato. Genghis Khan. Show to me, prove to me Genghis Khan exists using science. I'm going to enjoy my coffee until someone does it. Anyone? Try. Prove to me Genghis Khan exists using science.
Carbonated artifacts of Mongol weapons,
Okay.
skeletons
Yep.
in northern Iraq.
Sure. How do you know that's Genghis Khan and not Lady Gaga?
Recorded history.
Okay, recorded history, but that's not science. Good answer, but that's not science. You see, recorded history is not science. It's recorded history. So we know Genghis Khan exists, we know that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ exists, we know that Isa al-Islam existed, we know that Aristotle existed, Plato existed, King Henry existed. This is not science, this is history. So if someone says, I believe in science, you have to basically deny all of history. And in fact, what you also have to deny is most of news. Because news is based on testimony. It's based on the say-so of others. So if someone says, I believe in science, you've wiped out the majority of the beliefs in your head. Because you can't prove them. Okay. Prove that you have 100 times great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. Using science. I'm going to enjoy my coffee until someone answers. Yes, young man?
DNA.
Okay. What about DNA? Where's your 100 times great-great-great-great-grandmother so you can go get her DNA? Where is she? You don't know? Trade?
Necessity, by necessity,
Yep.
must have been.
Okay, great. That's logic, not science. Science is based on logic. If you have, look, imagine there's a human brain. This is my brain, right? There's three ways that you know things. There's things which are innate, things that you know without any evidence, things that you just know to be true. For example, right and wrong exists. The world is real. This is innate. Two, you have reason, which is using logic. How do I know I have a grandmother, which is 100 times great-great-great-grandmother? I use logic. Underneath that, you have what's known as empiricism, which is using the senses. Science is a fusion of two of those systems. So when someone says, I believe in science, and they think that is a rational answer, they basically can't prove their grandmother existed, because they are denying logic. Okay, logic and maths, again. Can science prove 1 + 1 is 2? Okay, let me ask you another question. Can science prove mathematics?
Not really, no.
Why?
Because mathematics is a different section of learning. science has nothing to do with 1 + 1 = 2.
Okay, you nearly got there. Yes?
Maths is based on logic.
Maths and logic, same thing. You actually said something very deep there. That's actually a very, very deep point. It is, yeah. Maths is considered pure logic. But science, yes?
Do maths and logic come underneath the banner of science? Because they're
Perfect. You can't do science unless you assume logic and maths. Okay?
Can I go back to this?
Sure.
You know, we guys said I believe in science. If those who believe in science, why can't they believe in history as well?
They can, but
Why does it have to wipe out all this because of belief in science? He's
no.
saying,
There's a new movement across the world where people say, I believe in science. It's like they call it scientism.
right.
It's actually a movement across the world where people say, I will not believe in anything unless it's scientific. Okay, moral truths. Okay? Right and wrong. Can science prove it's right to give charity? Can science prove it's right to help the elderly? Can science prove it's wrong to steal copyrighted material? Can science do that? Yes or no? No? No answer? Everyone falling asleep? No, it can't. So if you say I believe in science, like I believe whatever science says, well, science has nothing to do with what's right and wrong. Okay, this is a big word, but it actually means something very, very simple. Physical, real physical. Metaphysical is anything beyond physics. Okay? So, the world is real. That's metaphysical. Wasif has a mind. He has a mind. That's metaphysical. Language and the truths of language and how do you know that logic works and all these types of things, this is metaphysics, it is not science. So if someone says, I believe in science, like, as an answer, they basically have to deny history, deny logic, deny mathematics, deny moral truths, deny metaphysical truths, which basically means they're only left with how many of their beliefs can be scientific? How many? Less than 1%. So 99% of what's in their brain when they say, I believe in science, goes out the window. In fact, what if somebody says, this is a curveball for you guys, what if somebody says, no, I can read stuff in a book. I can read a book of physics, I can read a book on evolution, I can read a book on chemistry. So I can know things. How can you show that that is incoherent?
That's the same with what religious
Not really.
people. As far as I think, we read a book, and we get information from a book.
Well, okay, let me put it another way. If someone says, I believe in science, like science is the way, and they say, I'm reading this book, and it's telling me what I need to know. What's the problem with that?
Just taking what is there at face value.
Yes, it's taking what's there at face value, which is called? Huh? Someone said it? Testimony. Excellent. Which is another type of knowledge. So, they haven't even done those experiments themselves. They haven't actually used science there. They've just believed what someone says. So this whole idea of I believe in science, when someone gives you a nonsensical answer, one of the first things you need to do is actually challenge what they're saying. By the way, I didn't say this to that guy. I'm just telling you. This is so that you know how to address somebody who believes, oh, I only believe in something because it's scientific. Because one of the things they're going to say is, I can't see God, therefore it's illogical to believe in God. But then the counter example you're going to give to that is, hang on, that's based on logic. You can use one of the avenues as logic. Okay. Like I mentioned, the dog without any teeth, science has absolutely nothing to do with atheism. This could not be clearer. One of the things which I found very strange when I started looking into Darwin's views and the views of contemporary evolutionary biologists such as Richard Dawkins, is Darwin would have disagreed with them. I believe if Charles Darwin was alive today, he would have completely disagreed with people like Richard Dawkins, who's an avid atheist, and other people, because in his writings he makes it clear there is absolutely nothing in my theory which would lead anyone to become an atheist. In fact, he says, it seems to me absurd to doubt that a man may be an ardent theist and an evolutionist. Theist means someone who believes in God. He also says in another, and you can go to this project called Darwin Correspondence Project, where it's got Darwin's letters. And one of the things he says is that in my wildest extremes of fluctuations, I still never became an atheist. I still never denied God. He, all his life, was pretty much a deist. A deist is somebody who believes in God, but they don't believe in religion. Later on in life, because of the problem of evil, because of his daughter passing away, he became an agnostic. He became confused about God. But he was never an atheist. This is what it says in Scientific Method in Brief by Cambridge University. This is an academic book which teaches you the most fundamental foundations of science and the way it's actually applied. To insist that science obeys methodological naturalism and that science supports atheism is to get high marks for enthusiasm but low marks for logic. So forget what people say on YouTube, forget what people say in popular lectures, forget what a school teacher sometimes might try and intertwine between biology and disbelief in God and this sort of thing. Academically, there's no difference of opinion, there's no ikhtilaf here. Science has absolutely nothing to do with atheism. Literally absolutely nothing. In fact, and I think this is extremely important, because this is actually one of the projects which we're actually working on as IERA currently, which is a publication about the Islamic history of science. The first person, according to some secular historians who put a systematic method of science, was actually a Muslim who lived approximately 1,000 years ago. His name was Hassan ibn Haytham. He was a Quranic scholar, and he is considered by some as the first scientist. Now, his belief in Allah, his belief in the Quran, his belief in the Prophet ﷺ did not make him an atheist. It actually led him to studying science. So there's no link between science and atheism. And also this whole thing which people come up with, Yahmakallah, about science, in the Muslim world, it lasted 200-300 years and then it ended. Actually, there's quite a lot of evidence that it carried on all the way through the actual Ottoman period as well. So what we have to understand as Muslims is, for 1400 years of our history, we were either one of the world's superpowers or the world's superpower. Intellectually, philosophically, mathematically, in terms of art, whatever you want, militarily. We were that. Yes, we've had a bit of a slump since, for the last 80, 90 years. But we need to tell our young people this, because the impression that, especially certain people in the Western world try and create is that we've been in the Dark Ages for 1400 years, which is absolutely not true. Okay, the terms of engagement, when I'm going to be speaking about Darwinian evolution, is anybody I'm going to refer to today is not somebody who believes in creationism, intelligent design. They're going to be secular, mainstream. They're going to believe in naturalism, and it's going to be from mainstream peer-reviewed journals. Okay, science. When they say this is the scientific method, there's actually a whole bunch of methods which are the scientific method. So there's loads of them. But a simple, basic understanding of the scientific method is you have a hypothesis, you test out the hypothesis against observations, and then you repeatedly test it until you come up with a theory, and that theory then becomes like a paradigm, becomes like something which is generally accepted. Okay, actually the clue is here. Why doesn't science lead to certainty? It's all written there for you.
Because you can't test everything, you only test a certain, you have a certain set of stuff that you're looking at, not the whole picture, so to speak.
Yeah, excellent. So, exactly like you said, you can't test everything, you can't know everything. You can only deal with what you have currently at hand. So a popular belief in Europe used to be that all swans are white. So imagine there's a scientist, there's a naturalist who is looking at swans. He sees 1,000 swans, he knows they're white. He notes 2,000 swans, he says, these are white. He knows 3,000 swans, and then he says, these are white too. So using that limited set of data, he makes a general conclusion. All swans are white. Now what actually happened is when European explorers went to Australia, they discovered a black swan. And that challenged the theory that all swans are white. This has been termed the problem of induction. It's also known as the black swan problem. In science, you can always have a new set of data which can challenge your previous conclusion. Secondly, scattergraph. Now, here's a scattergraph, and you've got some dots there. Those dots are observations. So, DNA, fossils, the length of a crocodile's tail, whatever. These are observations. These are things that we know to be true. How many different lines can you make using that same set of data? This is the answer time.
Whoever's interpreting it. You know.
Okay, somebody else, because you answered so many now, mashallah. Brother there next to the radiator, the one about to fall asleep. How many lines can you draw? How many lines can you draw, bro? If you got this.
Draw as many as you like.
Draw as many as you like.
Scattered all over.
What do you mean by lines?
Lines of best fit, lines to try and fit the data. As Amjad Bhai said, you can draw as many lines as you want. You can make a line from the bottom, the bottom left to the top right, like a straight line. You can make a curve, you can make a sine curve, you can make an exponential thing. The same set of data can give rise to multiple theories. So science has two particular problems. In fact, no, you shouldn't call them problems. These are limitations which keep it in flux. Because the fact that scientific conclusions change is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It's the beauty of science that we can always change its conclusions. It's the beauty of science that we can always revise what we know. So we have the black swan problem, and we have that the same set of data, the same set of observations can give rise to multiple theories. So for example, what doesn't change is things we can directly observe, these green dots. The shape of the earth, water is composed of hydrogen and oxygen, there's certain fossils which exist, DNA is a code. These are observations. Some people think this is science. No, it's not. These are just observations. You can use these observations to come up with what's known as astrology. What's astrology? Anybody know? What's astrology? Yes?
They're like universal studies.
Palm reading. Yeah, palm reading. You can say, I can observe this star is here, therefore next year this is going to happen, you know, this type of shirky stuff, right? This is astrology. Observations can be used for science, and they can be used for what's known as pseudoscience, fake science, right? So it's very, very important to understand when sometimes people say, science does lead to certainty, look, medicine works, or gravity exists, or the shape of the earth. This isn't science itself. These are observations which scientists use to come up with a scientific theory. Those observations on their own are just observations. They're just observations. This is very important to understand. Science is more than just observations. It's a method to take a hypothesis, test it against observations, and come up with theories. Something very, very important to understand, a common mistake a lot of people do is they say Darwin's theory is not scientific. Okay? It is scientific. Darwin's theory is a valid scientific model, theory, and paradigm. I'm going to explain why. Before I explain why, before I go into that, because I skipped a slide by accident, science has a particular assumption about the world, which is an assumption that they work on. So imagine there's somebody who walks into this mosque and he has a lab coat on and he has some goggles on. This lab coat and this these goggles that he's actually wearing, these are things which scientists have to do. They have to adopt a certain way of thinking about the world before they actually do science. And the assumption that they actually have is an assumption of naturalism. Okay, this is a very important term, naturalism. Naturalism basically means anything we are going to study, we're going to give a natural explanation. So for example, when it comes to human beings, we cannot accept that human beings appeared in the history of life without being linked to something else. They have to be linked to something else. Cause and effect, and only giving naturalistic accounts. So when a scientist comes up with assumptions, you always have to understand they're coming from that particular way of looking at the world. Now if a scientist, he takes off his lab coat, takes off his goggles, and then he takes his conclusions and he says these are true, this is when you have a problem. Because if you base views that you have constructed using an assumption, those views are never going to be absolutely true. They're always going to be based on that assumption. Okay, even the most ardent, hardcore proponents of Darwinian evolution, they admit to a very basic fact, which no one can deny, which is what I just mentioned previously about the philosophy of science. Richard Dawkins, he says, we must acknowledge the possibility that new facts may come to light which will force our successors of the 21st century to abandon Darwinism or modify it beyond recognition. Okay? Very important to understand. Even though the public persona of some of these people may be, yeah, it's true, religion's all rubbish, yeah, we got it all worked out, he himself, in his lesser known works, he admits to this. This is in his book, A Devil's Chaplain. Also, it's very important that he used the term Darwinism here. Because a lot of the times when you're actually using this term, people say to you, yeah, but you can't use that term. Who came up with that term? What is this term? It's actually an academic term. There's a difference between evolution and Darwinism. These are two different things. Evolution is one of the most confusing topics in the world because of the way that it can be defined as almost anything within evolutionary biology. This is why it's very, very important that if you are to have a discussion with somebody about this topic, you define what you mean. Evolution, in terms of its basic meaning, simply means change over time, biological change over time. And this has been written about, philosophized about, theorized about, speculated about for at least 3,000 years of human history. Evolution as an idea did not start with Darwin. Even some of the medieval Muslim scientists spoke about it, the ancient Hindus spoke about it, the ancient Chinese spoke about it, the Greeks spoke about it, the Egyptians spoke about it, the Babylonians spoke about it. So evolution itself is just an observation. We can see there's biological change happening within nature and within, even if you look at human beings, that human beings have different colors and different physical traits in different parts of the world. That's evolution. But Darwin came up with a particular theory. Okay? He came up with a particular theory which is known as Darwinian evolution, which is that all of life, going back, came from one single origin. Okay? That's the first point. Secondly, the way that this first beginning of life, this first cell, grew into this tree of life is via a mechanism which is known as natural selection. Now you may not understand what that means, you may not have studied biology, but all you need to know at this point to understand the rest of this talk is that there is a difference between the two. Darwin came up with a particular history of evolution, which was a tree of life, and he came up with a particular mechanism of evolution. Now here's three things about Darwinian evolution which absolutely no one on earth can deny, unless you're insane. I mean, you literally have to be insane to deny this. Darwinian evolution, according to mainstream secular academics, is based on a probabilistic framework which has multiple assumptions which are being challenged, and there are disputes about its most fundamental ideas. If you don't take away anything from this lecture today, just remember this slide. Somebody, like for example, this guy standing here, he could give you a talk about Darwinian evolution, he could speak about biochemistry, genetics, anatomy, psychology, comparative biology, comparative anatomy, biochemistry, biogeography, linguistics, sociology, whatever. All of those fields can seem like an overwhelming tsunami of evidence that therefore it's true. But that's not the case. And the reason why it's not the case is because the same set of data can give rise to multiple theories. And we would be very foolish to think that only one theory can explain all the data. One of the examples that was given about how difficult it is to work out the history of evolution in the world, based on what we actually have, was an example given in the paper Science, which said, it's like trying to work out the plot of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace with only 13 randomly selected pages. So if I took out the book, Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, all the pages are blank except 13 pages, and I gave every single person in this room a copy, and I asked you to tell me the beginning and the end, which characters come in, which characters go out, what happened, how many different stories can you come up with? If there's 50 people in this room, how many stories can you come up with? At least 50. So why are we being told there's only one answer to the understanding of how life came on this earth and how it developed? And according to the National Science Foundation, and again, all these numbers and everything, they can be changed, but this just goes to show you how speculative it is. According to the National Science Foundation, a study published last year in May, 99.999% of species are missing. Not organisms, species. We don't have their fossils, we don't have their DNA, we don't have nothing. So all that we have instead in terms of Darwinian evolution is based on 0.0001% of the data. And even on that 0.0001% of the data, you can come up with multiple theories. If you, again, you didn't understand anything I said so far, then just ask me for this slide, read up what this is about. This is enough for you to understand it's not absolutely true.
Sorry, just a quick question.
Yes?
When you said 99.9% of species are missing, what are you actually talking about? You're talking about, you know, if you've got sort of a picture of a particular organism,
Yeah.
right, step by step by step.
Yeah.
You're talking about missing links.
No.
Okay.
Good question, very good question, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about species. Like complete species. We have no idea what they look like. They could be things weirder than dinosaurs, and we don't know what they look like. Okay? So that's why I use the term species, not organisms. And if you go and look at the study by National Science Foundation, they say species. They say there may have been 1 trillion species on Earth. Allahu Akbar, 1 trillion. And we have literally scraps. Yep.
How do they know they existed at the 99?
They're using genetic diversity and other sort of assumptions to try and come up with retrospective numbers of how many species may have existed, but that number could be completely wrong. I'm only telling you what they've concluded so far.
What you're saying is basically 0.001% of data, they're
Yep.
drawing 100% of conclusions.
Which is induction.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a black swan problem, which is why it's speculative. Now, this, imagine, you know that scatter graph I drew in the beginning? This is a scatter graph on drugs. It's a scatter graph on steroids, right? Imagine all those fields. Imagine genetics, bioinformatics, biogeography, homology. Imagine all those different fields. Imagine how many different interpretations you can come up with. Darwin came up with universal common ancestry in the tree of life. Other people before Darwin, such as John Baptiste Lamarck, he came up with the hedge of life. Others have challenged the tree of life and come up with the web of life. Some believe in gradualism, some believe in rapid change, some believe in progression, some don't believe in progression. Whatever you make is bound to be probabilistic, is bound to be speculative. This is very, very important to understand. Now, just so stories. Does anyone know what just so stories are? Yes, right in the back. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Stories about animals.
Stories, yeah. Rudyard Kipling's book, Just So Stories. Okay? So, how did the elephant get its snout?
Drinking water and the crocodile got its trunk.
Yeah, that's it. And it kept pulling it, right? Now, that is a Just So story. It's a little children's story You know, it's just a scenario. All of these stories which are made up about life on Earth 4 billion years ago, which no one, I mean, who was sitting on a chair 4 billion years ago and watching life develop? Right? So all of these scenarios about how this thing evolved, how that thing evolved, what you watch in documentaries, what you watch on TV and what you see on social media about, oh, this thing evolved into this and we did this. These are referred to by some evolutionary biologists as just so stories. Others, they try and pretend we've got the answer, we've got it worked out, this is how it evolved, this is how human being evolved from a chimpanzee-like ancestor, we evolved bigger brains because of this, we this, that. These people say, people like Richard C. Lewontin, who is an evolutionary biologist, who is an atheist from Harvard University, him and others, and these are an extreme minority, but they're honest, they say these are just so stories. How on earth do you know what happened millions of years ago? These are just stories that you've made up. Yes, they may sound plausible. Yes, they may sound scientific. Yes, they may sound really, really interesting, but these are just so stories. One of the stories that was pointed out by Raymond Tallis was the evolution of color. Men like the color blue and women like the color red. Now remember, it's very, very important for Darwinian biologists to try and explain everything about human behavior as well, and our anatomy and our genetics in terms of Darwin's theory. So they said the reason why men like the color blue, and because we've got the mutation for the color blue, is because the ones who evolved so that they the ones who went out to hunt and they liked the color blue because the sky was blue, because the watering hole was blue, they were more likely to survive. Therefore, men generally like the color blue today. Women, they cook the meat, they pick berries, they forage, they pick strawberries, so that's why they like the color red. So they were explaining why men like the color blue and women like the color red using Darwin's theory. Raymond Tallis, who's an atheist scientist, he basically said this is nonsense. Because 150 years ago in Victorian Britain, women liked the color blue and men liked the color red. It was actually the other way around. And he points out, like other people do, that these scenarios, which sound plausible, are just stories that are made up in the past, which are extremely hard to verify in any way. Okay, another very important concept. One of the most important ideas, in fact, it is the central idea for Darwin's tree, is the assumption of homology. Homology is the assumption that similarities are due to common descent. So they look at similarity between a human being and a chimpanzee, and they say, look at this similarity, therefore, going back, they must have a common ancestor. Okay, the first thing to understand, even before this slide, is that's an assumption. Okay? It's not absolutely true. It's not a fact of reality. It's not a part of external furniture. It's just an assumption. And sometimes, some of these people, without realizing it, some of the people who are very zealous to try and I'm going to explain why in the end this scientific theory has become into a religion, why these people fall into circular reasoning without actually realizing it. They basically say similarities are due to common descent. They say similarities are due to common descent. And then they say, look at these similarities. Therefore, this is due to common descent. What's the problem then? Maybe I have it written down. No, I don't have it written down. Okay, similarities are due to common descent. That's the fact. Similarities exist, therefore similarities are due to common descent. What's the problem then?
Is only an assumption?
No.
It's a fallacy.
It's a fallacy. Yeah, what type of fallacy is it? No, it's not an oxymoron, but it's a fallacy. Anybody else? It's circular reasoning. Your conclusions are already within your premises. Your conclusions are already within your argument. Okay, so first thing to understand is an assumption. It's not brute fact. Secondly, we know of a counterexample to this assumption of homology, which is known as homoplasy. For example, here we have two saber-toothed cats, one's from North America, one's from South America. They never bred, they never intermingled, they never met, they're from two different continents, yet if you look at their skeletons, you would say it has to be due to common ancestry. But it's not. This is known as homoplasy. Homoplasy has been observed in nature at a biochemical level, genetic level, anatomical level, sociological level, linguistic level, and this is something which no one can deny. We usually get told only half the story. We only get told homology, right? But homoplasy does actually exist. So we have this quagmire. How do we decide? Because if someone wants to make certain claims, not claims based on, if somebody says, I believe in it because it's probabilistic, I would really challenge them. I'd say to them, fine, yalla, fine, enjoy yourself, no problem. But if someone says, no, it's true, then I would simply say to them, well, look what we have here. We have the wing of a bird and the wing of a bat. That's not due to common ancestry, that's homoplasy. We have the gene for echolocation. What's echolocation, young man?
So, it's like the thing inside the whales they used to find their prey.
Excellent. Very good. Bats have them as well, right? So we have echolocation in the bat and the whale, and we have the gene for that, yet this is not due to common ancestry, this is due to homoplasy. So if someone wants to make that claim with certainty, they're basically making the claim, similarities are due to common descent, except when they're not. If you want to make certain claims, that's basically what you're saying. If you want to stick to science, if you want to say it's probabilistic, it's based on assumptions, that's fine. But if someone wants to be certain, then what they're basically saying is similarities are due to common descent except when they're not, which is fine, because it just makes them look very intellectual. Here's an example of something related to our own species. We are told so often, look at the similarity between a human being and a chimpanzee. I mean, just look at that. But there are such similarities between human beings and other things which we're not related to, which we are so far away, even according to them, which we don't have in common with chimpanzees. For example, we have ants. Ants live in, what's their population, by the way, ants? Do they live in groups of 5, 10, colonies of how much? Millions. And do you know in a colony, they're all brothers and sisters? Millions, and you have that colony. Okay, who's seen that video on YouTube where a guy, he goes and he puts mercury into an ant? Who's seen that? Raise your hand if you've seen that. Right. That amazing structure, show me a chimpanzee that can build a structure like that. Chimpanzees don't build their own buildings. And that interesting structure, that huge sky city, which is what it really is. You know, the guy hoses it with water and then you get that particular structure. Chimpanzees don't have that. So in terms of the millions of population that we live, chimpanzees live in maximum populations that they've been observed of 100. That's the maximum. But usually they live in about groups of 15. Okay, another thing. Ants go to war. Ants have fadayin, ants that go out to fight, which are supposed to die for the colony. Ants, they build bridges, right? Ants have funerals, they have slavery, they have economics, they have markets, they have all these things which are so similar to human beings. Chimpanzees do not. So in terms of our social behavior, we're actually very, very similar to ants. In terms of our linguistic behavior, we should be similar to chimpanzees, if their idea is actually true. Yet the closest thing in nature to human language is actually songbirds. So this is what the atheist evolutionary thinker and philosopher of biology Elliot Sober says in his book Evidence in Evolution, published by Cambridge University. Both of the following thoughts are naive. Humans and chimps must share a common ancestor because they're so similar, and humans and mushrooms must have arisen independently because they're so different. Within the probabilistic framework, there is no must in either case. What I want you guys to realize is this. If somebody says, do you know what? I believe human beings and chimpanzees have a common ancestor because I believe in this based on a probabilistic framework, which has some assumptions which are being challenged, and I know it's disputable. I would never challenge someone like that. I would say to them, welcome. You're actually believing in something and you're being honest about it. But if someone says, I believe it to be true, and I want you to believe in it because it's based on evidence, then I would say, wait, hang on a second. You're going against mainstream secular understanding of evolutionary biology, which is actually what we have. There is a huge difference between the way evolutionary biology is actually pursued and the way it's perceived. There's a huge dichotomy. When you hear certain people, you think, oh my God, it's absolutely true. When you go to academic literature, you find these sort of things. This is very, very important for us to understand. Some assumptions. How long do I have, by the way, before Maghrib?
Q&A is going to carry on after Maghrib.
Sure, but how long do I have before Maghrib?
5 minutes.
Okay, that's good. We're about to finish anyway. Okay. There are some assumptions. Remember I said probabilistic framework, then I said assumptions. Okay. This is extremely important to understand. In Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, he says something, and remember, when I'm reading this out, remember the black swan problem and remember the scatter graph problem. Because Charles Darwin was a very honest man. Even though his ideas, we may not agree with them, but he was an honest man. He said, long before having arrived at any part of my work, a crowd of difficulties will have occurred to the reader. Some of them are so grave that to this day I can hardly reflect on them without being staggered. These are difficulties for his own theory. But to the best of my judgment, the greater number are only apparent, and only those that are real are not, I think, fatal to my theory. So, the main thing he's saying here is he does believe his theory to be correct, but he does recognize there's problems. And interestingly enough, those problems that he highlighted 153 years ago, or 155 years ago, are actually more now than then. The problems actually got bigger, and the problems are in the areas where he highlighted himself. Yet we are not told of these problems. We have some assumptions of Darwinism, gradualism, tree of life, selfish gene. Gradualism as an assumption, this is being challenged many, many times by mainstream paleontologists, people who study fossils. The tree of life, very famous idea, very famous, is taught as a fact. People like Carl Woese, any book on evolutionary biology that you pick up at a university level, you're going to come across his name. He's an atheist evolutionary biologist. He says it's the web of life, not the tree of life. Craig Venter, brilliant evolutionary biologist. He won the National Medal of Science in America, again an atheist. He doesn't believe in the tree of life, he believes in the bush of life. Selfish gene, we are only there to survive and reproduce. Well, the problem here is, I've just put up these pictures of these children, and pretty much everyone here wants to help them. Why do we have empathy? Why do we have sympathy? Why do we have these actual things? These are big problems for Darwinism. This one we can carry on in the Q&A. According to Oxford evolutionary biologist Dennis Noble, all the central assumptions of neo-Darwinism have been disproven. Now, let me just warn you guys, this is a minority view. And this man, he's an atheist, he's an evolutionary biologist, he still believes in human-chimp ancestry and he still believes in other parts of Darwin's tree. But in terms of the mechanism, he says all of the assumptions have been disproven. Disputes. There's at least 3 fully fledged alternatives to Darwinian evolution which exist in the literature, the scientific literature. If it was absolutely true, why would we have 3 completely different alternatives? And this is a project called the Third Way of Evolution, which has atheist evolutionary biologists from across the world who don't believe in God, and nor do they believe in Darwin's theory. They're trying to come up with a third way. This is the last slide, and this I think is extremely important, and inshallah we can carry on in the Q&A. There is an incredible amount of sociological pressure to push out Darwinian evolution as a fact. A huge amount of effort is put at a political level, at a social media level, and even at a popular level. Why? The clue is in a book which was published just a few months ago called Darwinism as Religion, published by Oxford University by an atheist philosopher of science. And it gives it away to you in the cover, Darwinism as Religion. Richard Dawkins wrote in his book in the 1980s, Darwin's theory allowed him to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Now we know that to be false because Darwin himself didn't agree with that. But the reason why there's so much pressure and so much disinformation about this particular theory is because, according to secular mainstream historians and secular mainstream philosophers and secular mainstream biologists, this is the only scientific theory in history which has become into a religion, into a political system, into an ethical system, into a system which has forgeries, and a system which you cannot criticize within science without being labeled a heretic. Here are two examples. Masayoshi Nai is an atheist evolutionary biologist from Japan. His formulas are taught in every single biology textbook at a university level in the world. Every single biology textbook in the world at university level, you're going to come across this guy, Masayoshi Nai. He says Charles Darwin is a god. He didn't mean it in a good way. He said, I cannot challenge Charles Darwin because he doesn't believe in Darwin's theory of evolution. I cannot challenge him because he's become into a god, and this scientific theory has become into a religion. Lynn Margulis, she was another atheist evolutionary biologist from America. She won again the National Medal of Science in America. Her theory of end symbiogenesis is taught in every single university in the world. She said history is going to remember Darwinists, people who believe in Darwinian evolution, as an Anglo-Saxon religion. These are her words. She's an atheist, but this is her words. There is an incredible amount of sociological pressure to push this out as a fact, which is why, going back, just to end, I started off on the dog example. Yeah? You have this dog, it's scary, you think it's going to bite, it hasn't got any teeth. This impression that we've got this theory and it's disproven Adam and Eve and it's disproven God and it's disproven this and it's disproven that is being pushed by people who want to get rid of religion. And those same people, when people within their own communities who are atheists, who are evolutionary biologists, like these people, when they challenge them, they call us creationists and they call these people who are atheists secular creationists. Every single thing that we've learned today, if there's any message I want to give to you guys, is basically this. Whenever a challenge comes up, the cure to a doubt is to ask. There's too many people in our community who just stay silent, who don't ask questions, who don't bother learning. Now inshallah in the Q&A we're going to cover any questions you have. Anything good I've said is from Allah, any mistake is from myself. Jazakallah khair for listening.
So we're going to have a Q&A now, inshallah, where you get to ask, inshallah, whatever type of question relating to the topic. So if you can try and keep it on topic, inshallah. So anything to do with atheism, evolution, science, etc. So ask your questions, inshallah, and be as open as you can. One of the things that the Lord mentioned is, if someone has a thought inside, the last thing you want to do is keep it suppressed. So let it out, inshallah, and it's an open platform. There's going to be more of a discussion type than a direct answer to the question. So please, inshallah.
Sister can write the questions.
Sisters can write the questions and pass them down as well, inshallah.
So is there a link between man and chimp when they say, because they have a 99% homology with DNA with chimps? So Darwinism, evolutionary biology says there is a link, there's a missing link. What's your take on that?
Okay, very good question. 2 or 3 different topics. One is 99% similarity between human beings and chimpanzees.
In the DNA?
Yeah.
The building blocks?
Yeah, DNA. So the first thing we need to realize is what they're basically doing is they're using the concept which is known as homology. Okay? Now, homology is the idea that similarities are due to common descent. Okay? Now, that's an assumption. And that particular assumption, no matter how much similarity you're going to show, that's still going to remain an assumption. So you can't use that to say it's absolutely true. You can say, under this assumption, we think it's probable. But there's also some other assumptions. So when someone says human beings and chimpanzees, they have a common ancestor, there's actually 3 assumptions they've made without realizing it. Sometimes we just regurgitate. The first assumption is similarities are due to common descent, which is an assumption. The second assumption is that there's only one origin, and human beings and everything else came through that origin. And the third assumption is there is a mechanism of transformation from A to B, which is natural selection. So there's 3 assumptions. So if someone wants to say, I believe in human chimpanzee, I'll be like, fine. But as long as you understand it's based on these 3 assumptions. Also something else which is very important to realize. When they say 99% similarity itself is a very tricky thing. Okay? Similarity itself can tell you many different things. So Carl Linnaeus was the first guy who classified life the way it actually is. He existed about 150 years before Darwin, 100 years before Darwin. And he was a believer in God. He didn't believe in common ancestry, but he put human beings and chimpanzees together because he said there's similarities. But he didn't say similarities are due to common descent. He just said they are similarities. The second point to take away is the assumption of homology, which is similarities are due to common descent. We know of a counterfactual to this assumption, which is known as homoplasy. They are similarities which are not due to common descent at a genetic level, biochemical level, anatomical level. And even the way they come up with 99%, you have to understand, it's the way you measure it and what you measure. Because if, we hear all the time 99% similarity between human beings and chimpanzees. Well, using the same method, which is a very limited method, where you don't compare the 2 entire sets of DNA, the 2 entire genomes. You take selective parts and you measure them in a selective way. That same method gives 98% similarity between human beings and mice. Okay? So it's a very speculative method. Also, according to some evolutionary biologists, which it's not a popular view, but it's the view of some of them, and these are again mainstream secular atheist biologists, they say it's not possible to do an objective analysis between human beings and chimpanzee genomes. They say whatever you do is bound to be subjective. It can't be objective because one genome is bigger than the other. There's huge differences in terms of insertions and deletions and other types of things. So what they say is, and there's actually a paper published on this, The Myth of 1%, by John Cohen and others, is published in the peer-reviewed journal Science. And they basically say this 1% is a myth, the 1% difference between human beings and chimpanzees. They say it's actually incredibly difficult to even come up with any percentage difference between the 2. Unless, of course, you make assumptions and you ignore certain parts and you focus on other parts. But for the sake of argument, even if we were to accept 99%, it still wouldn't mean common ancestry is true. Hope that answers the question. Okay. Yes?
So the alternative mechanisms which we have to natural selection, are they a naturalistic mechanism or do they require intelligence?
Okay. Science only allows naturalistic mechanisms. Some people try to bring things like intelligent design and other sort of things. To be honest, I don't know much about intelligent design, so I don't want to say something, but I would say that science, as it stands today, only allows naturalistic explanations, which there's nothing wrong with that. Because even if you pick up the Quran, Allah says in the Quran, in chapter 67, and I'm sure, where's that brother? Where's your brother Moin? Is he here? Oh, he's gone. Anyway, I was going to get him to actually say the verse itself. Allah says, do you not see the birds up in the sky who are spreading and closing their wings? None holds them up except Allah. So there we have a phenomenon which has 2 explanations in the Quran. Allah says, do you not see the birds in the sky who are spreading and closing their wings, which is lift, which is release theory, which is aerodynamics, whatever you want to call it. So there's a causal relationship, there's a naturalistic explanation. But Allah also says, none holds them up except Allah. So that's a metaphysical explanation, that's a why explanation. Science explains how. The explanation that we as theists, we as Muslims use is a metaphysical, is a why. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ said, when a nation commits zina, Allah sends diseases which their forefathers have never heard of. And I'm sure for many of the elderly uncles here in the masjid, you know, in the 1930s, 40s, no one heard of HIV, gonorrhea, and all these things, right? So there's something the Prophet is saying. He's saying, when a nation commits zina, Allah sends disease. Now, look, there's a physical relationship. Zina is causing diseases. But who's sending the diseases? Allah. So in Islam, we believe, not only as Muslims, but any person, even if they're not Muslim, science explains how. The belief in God is a different type of explanation. It's a why explanation. And Ibn Qayyim al-Jawzi, the way he reconciled this, people get confused, but he gave a very simple analogy. He said, the world is an open book. Okay? It is an open book, you understand the world. And the Quran is also a book. One book is the word of Allah, it's the kalam of Allah, which is the speech of Allah, which is the Quran. And another, which is the open book, is also the speech of Allah, because Allah said, which is the world. These two things, they're compatible. If there seems to be a conflict, the conflict is either in our understanding of the Quran or our understanding of nature. But the way that science works, it only gives naturalistic explanation. So those things I put on the board, neo-Lamarckian evolution, Mendelian mutationism, evolution by self-organization, evolution by natural genetic engineering, evolution by acquiring genomes, those 5 alternatives, those still can accommodate human chimp ancestry and tree of life. But the reason why I'm highlighting them is this. Imagine there's a bridge. You have this bridge and it's going over water. If the foundations break, can you cross the bridge? Does everyone get that analogy? If you have a bridge and you have foundations on either side, if the foundations break, can you cross? Yes or no? No. There's 2 aspects of Darwin's theory. One is the tree of life, which is the bridge. One is natural selection, which is the foundations. Darwin's theory of evolution is not a theory of similarity, it's a theory of transformation. If the bridges, if the foundations break, which is the mechanism, the tree of life breaks. These two are connected. So the reason why I show those 5 alternatives is something we've been taught is true, is you have to be a complete idiot to deny it. That's the sort of pressure they put on people. Why do they have 5 complete alternatives by atheist evolutionary biologists if it's so true, if it's absolutely true? So that's the only reason why I'm highlighting it, and I'm fully aware Darwinian evolution, just as incompatible it is with those different paradigms, I'm not saying one paradigm is better than another. I'm just saying others exist, which shows that what we've been taught is not true in terms of, this is a fact and this is true. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yes?
So at the beginning you said that if someone says, I believe in science, you have to say to them, can you prove how your great-great-grandmother existed? And then they'd say it's logic, and then you said that's not science. But then afterwards you said that logic comes under the banner of science, so technically wouldn't that be science?
Okay, let me put it another way. Think of my brain, right? There's 3 ways I know it. Innate, things we know innately, things we have no evidence for, but all human beings believe in things innately. Right and wrong, the world is real, there are other minds, yes? Then you have reason, logic, right? Then you have empiricism, senses. Science is a subcategory of reason and empiricism. So science is based on logic and maths. Science, you can't prove logic and maths using science. That's what I'm basically saying. Yeah? Understood?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that evolution can be split into the tree of life or the web of life, and then random mutations and natural selection, right?
Yes.
Being the mechanism
But
of evolution.
Darwin wouldn't say the web of life. Darwin would say the tree of life.
Yeah, I just said it because you said that's a more appropriate way of calling it, right? The web of life.
No, it's not appropriate. The reason why I highlighted the web of life is to show you there's ikhtilaf. Not to say it's more appropriate, just to say there is ikhtilaf.
Okay. So the mechanism being random mutation. I hear that scientists have this term called speciation, that has apparently living examples of random mutation creating a new species which is more adaptable, more survivable in this environment. And then they take that and they say, hey look, so we have an example of a mutation creating a better, more living creature, and that proves that therefore we can explain all of creation through these examples, these 4 or 5 examples. How would you respond to somebody who says that?
Okay, I don't really respond to that. All I would do is, and we all should do this, right? Especially the people who study this field. What are their assumptions when they say that? I know exactly what you're saying.
Right.
What are their assumptions when they say that?
Can you give me an
So
example?
what they basically say is, look at the peppered moth example. Look at Lenski's bacterial example. We have things which are mutating, there's mutations, random mutations, and they seem to be changing. And this small change over a large period of time would lead to the tree of life. That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
Right. What are the assumptions they're making? Because they're actually making some assumptions.
That's sufficient to explain everything?
Yeah, of course, no, that's the claim they're making. What's the assumptions they're making?
That this was the cause of all life?
No, that's their conclusion. What is the assumptions they're making to come to that conclusion?
I'm not sure.
Okay, the first assumption is they are assuming there's one origin.
Yeah.
Okay? 2, they're assuming similarities in the biological world are due to common ancestry.
Right.
3, they're assuming that the changes that we see are due to natural selection and random mutations. So if somebody makes that claim, you can say to them, do you know what? Your claim makes sense. But you do have to realize it's based on 3 assumptions. So it's not proven, it's not true, it's not absolute. It still has these 3 assumptions which aren't proven.
Is there anything to suggest that these assumptions may not be true? Do we have any?
Other evolutionary biologists would say yes. They would say the tree of life doesn't make sense, the web of life makes sense, homology, homoplasy. They would say, like in the Royal Society just a few months ago, back in November, Gerard Muller, I hope I'm saying that right, I think it's like a German name. He's an atheist evolutionary biologist. He basically said during that Royal Society meeting in London, which is the oldest science society in the world, because they were, in this society, a top evolutionary biologists who were challenging Darwinism and others who were defending it. He basically said Darwin's theory can explain little small things, but it can't explain anything big. Okay? Now we as Muslims, we don't need to even go that deep. We don't need to disprove it scientifically. We don't need to do any of those things. All we need to do is this. We need to show to members of the public, when we come across people like this, that this is your perception of this theory, but this is the reality of it, according to secular mainstream academics. And just show them the discrepancy between the 2. That's what you need to do. Yes? Anybody who has answered yet? Yes?
You said those 3 things that dispute Darwin's theory, and one was gradualism. So can you go a bit more in depth into what gradualism is?
Okay. And also something very, very important. I'm going to ask this to everyone. If something in science, you make a prediction in science and it comes false, does that mean your theory is false? Huh? Not necessarily. So Darwin made an assumption for his theory in his book, The Origin of Species, and he said, my theory will absolutely break down if things didn't evolve in gradual steps. Small, steady, incremental. Very, very small. Now, according to a huge, vast majority of fossil experts, paleontologists, gradualism is not seen in the fossil record. It's actually rapid change. Others still believe in gradualism. So that fundamental assumption is being challenged. Does that make sense? The fundamental assumption is being challenged. And also something very, very important, which is also why I have a lot of respect for Darwin as compared to people like Richard Dawkins and others, is right in the beginning of The Origin of Species, he says, you can use the same evidence that I've used, you can use the same thing, about biogeography, fossils, whatever. You can use all of that data that I have used to come up with my theory. You can come up with a theory which is opposite to mine. He says this in Origin of Species, which is the scatter graph problem. But he says, I still think my theory is largely correct. Which shows you, he was not like the people today. I believe if he was alive today, he would totally disagree with most of what's going on in evolutionary biology in terms of not the secular academics, but the way it's being used as a bargaining sort of chip for atheism and as a sort of sledgehammer against religion, Darwin would have disagreed with that. I think he would have completely disagreed with that. Any other questions? Yes?
Are there parts of evolution that as Muslims we can believe in?
Sorry?
Are there parts of evolution that as Muslims we can believe in?
Okay, before I answer your question, I need to make something very, very clear. Science gives you knowledge which is always, at best, probabilistic. Always. Okay? What we as Muslims believe, do I believe in Allah because it's probable Allah exists? Do I believe in the Quran because it's probable that this is the word of God? No. We believe it to be certain. That's why the foundations of science will only give you, at best, something which is tentative. Which is why philosophers of science, mainstream philosophers of science, people who study how scientists come to conclusions, they say, no scientific theory, because remember, the scientific theory is the highest thing you can achieve in science. No scientific theory is written in stone. Any scientific conclusion, any scientific theory can be overturned. So, to answer your question, before I answer the question, the Quran says certain things about natural phenomena. Will science always be in line with the Quran? No. Does it have to be in line with the Quran? No. 70 years ago, the prevalent theory in cosmology was the static state model. The universe is eternal. The universe has always existed. Einstein believed in this and everybody else believed in this. There was a consensus that the universe has no beginning and it existed. Even in general relativity, Einstein's theory, he accommodated for that. What does the Quran say about the beginning of the universe? Does it have a beginning? What did the scientists say 70 years ago? There's no beginning. What would you have done as a Muslim 70 years ago? What would you have done? Yeah. But you would also say, I can accept your scientific theory of the eternal universe, I can accept it as a valid scientific theory. I just don't accept it to be absolutely true. Because science always has the problem of induction and the problem of the scatter graph problem, the black swan problem. Later on we discovered that that particular model wasn't correct and we replaced it with the Big Bang model. Right? The universe has a beginning. And now people say, look at the Quran, look at the Big Bang, therefore the Quran has a scientific miracle, and this type of stuff, right? There's loads of problems with that, so let's not get into that. 50 years from now, they could reject the Big Bang, and they could believe in the eternal universe again. So we don't have to always try and get the Quran to match science. Science keeps changing. Okay, in regards to your question, it's a very good question. I'm not going to say from my own understanding, because, I have no authority to speak about the Quran, but what I will say is that according to some commentators, there are similarities between what Darwin proposed and what certain things in the Quran. Some commentators have said that. There are overlaps. For example, Darwin assumed life began in water. Right? The Quran speaks about water. Some commentators speak about change. Allah adds to His creation, Allah subtracts from His creation. And other people speak about, that's what also Darwin came up with. I've read some stuff on this. I think some of it is inferiority complex, that we feel so much pressure, so we start reading into the Quran. Some of it, I think, is interesting. Because, again, we were talking about how there's things similar to us in nature, which we're not related to. One of them, we are supposed to be the common ancestor we are supposed to have a recent common ancestor with the chimpanzee, yet, in terms of parts of the body that we want to subtract, and heart valves, it's actually the pig, right? We can actually take parts of them and put them inside us, and in fact, before we had, synthetic insulin, we used to extract it from the pig and inject that in human beings. We didn't do that from chimpanzees. And there's quite a lot of similarities between human beings and chimpanzees, which is why there's an alternative to the standard human-chimp ancestry is called the pig-chimp hybrid. That a pig mated with a chimp and it created the human line. It's a separate theory they have, right? Now, some people take that and then they take the Quranic verse, Allah changed a nation into pigs and apes, right? And then they say, look, there's a correlation. What I would say is, look, there's no need for any of this. The simplest thing to actually do is to accept it as a scientifically valid theory, explain to them why we believe the Quran to be also have weight, and also understand that the position which I'm explaining to you today is not a unique position. It's not a position which was just made up a few months ago. Secular mainstream academics who are atheists, like David Stove, like Jerry Fodor, like these philosophers of science, they also say Darwin's theory is the best scientific model we have, it's the best scientific theory we have, but they say it's not absolutely true because of other reasons. Yeah? So that's my best way of trying to speak about evolution and the Quran.
Bro, can I say something? You know, there was something very, very interesting, right? Because I heard a lecture recently and he was saying that atheism is an overreaction to the oppression of the church that happened in the Dark Ages. And evolution is pushed more, you know, in the political arena now than ever before. What comments do you have on evolution and its influence of secular democracy and etc. and a lot of kind of the push on politics and the making evolution mainstream in the curriculum, etc.?
Okay, the first thing which I wanted to say, which I forgot to add to Amjad's question. I myself used to be one of those people who used to read the Quran and evolution together, right? Used to try and merge the two, try and come up with something. So I just wanted to admit that you know, it's a mistake I've made in the past. Just it's good to always know that, you know, you have to change your opinions. But back to your question. All I can say is, I don't want to say anything from my own perspective, because it's very dangerous when you, especially come on a platform like this, you're speaking in a masjid, you're speaking to Muslims, it's being recorded, you say something and then it sounds like an Islamic opinion. So I'm not going to say anything of my own opinion, I'm only going to say what mainstream secular historians have said about Darwin's theory. What they basically said is, Darwin got his theory from a book about capitalism, essentially. Right? And when Darwin proposed his theory, it took off, not because of its scientific merit initially, it took off because it dovetailed with the British Empire. Right? You see, okay, let me put it another way, through a question. So what if I said to you, general relativity works everywhere in the universe except in High Wycombe and inside Wise Mosque? What would you say?
Crazy.
You'd say you're crazy. Thank you. I wanted a frank answer, so you gave me a frank answer. So, if I say general relativity works everywhere except in High Wycombe, inside Wise Mosque, I'd be crazy. Darwin's theory of evolution, for those who believe it to be true, you can't say it's true for everything in nature, but it's not true for human beings. Right? If that's the case, then some human beings have to be better evolved than others. Some have to be superior to others. Which is why we got the out of Africa theory. That human beings left Africa, and in Africa we have the great apes, and the most primitive human beings, in Darwin's words, the Negroes, were in Africa. And Darwin wrote a lot about this. In The Descent of Man, which is one of his lesser known works, he speaks about the civilized races, which for him were the Caucasians, the whites. They are in the future going to wipe out the savage races, the blacks, the Indians, and whatnot. And the interesting thing, while he said this, North America, who were being wiped out? Aborigines. Aborigines ended up in human zoos as missing evolutionary links. Most people don't know this. Okay, what was happening in Australia?
Same thing.
Same thing. Did you know? Same thing. Australian Aborigines were used as missing links, and their skulls were sent over for study because they were seen as missing links. Okay, what was happening in Africa? Black people were being enslaved also. There was Yeah, slave trade, that's fine. What else was happening in Africa? Genocide. Genocide. Okay? Some of the Africans, they were captured and they were put inside human zoos, like Otabanga, who was taken from Congo, and he was studied as a missing link between the grey apes and the white man. So between the grey apes and the white man, you had this particular guy. And, you know, we still have pictures of people like this. Now, what's really interesting is this hierarchy of racism, this idea, according to a new book which was just been published a few years ago by an atheist evolutionary biologist, Yuval Harari. He's an Israeli evolutionary biologist, and he basically says Darwin's racism, and that scientific racism, and all the research that was being done about how the blacks are inferior and how the whites are superior in terms of IQ and all of this, eugenics, killing off the lesser known, the savage races, all of this ended with World War II. And he says in his book, which you can get from Amazon, right? He says in his book, it didn't end because of any scientific reasons. It ended because of what Hitler did, which is natural selection. Stalin, for example, one of the biggest dictators, one of the most cruel dictators of the last 100 years, how many people did he kill? Anyone know? Huh? For those of us like me and Amjad might go old enough to remember the Soviet Union, how many people did Stalin kill? You have to have some white hair like me and him to know what the Soviet Union did.
40 million, including people he started?
We're talking about millions, tens of millions. Okay, now those tens of millions of people that he killed, according to his own biographer, number one, he became an atheist after reading The Origin of Species. Number two, he believed he was applying Darwin's theory of evolution to social class, which is why he believed he was justified by nature to kill other people. Okay? So it's some very scary stuff. Now it's very, very interesting. They whitewash this from history. They try and take it out. But they still believe, and we still have, if you go online, you can actually find this. If you go to the IERA channel, I've done another talk where I actually talk about this. 6 types of human beings. You have the white, the Asian, Chinese, going down to the black. The difference between the black and the ape was 1 step. The difference between the black man and the white man was 5 steps. Right? And Darwin, in the Descent of Man, he laid out the framework which justified much of the genocide. His son, Leonard Darwin, was the president of the Eugenics Society in the UK. Eugenics is about killing off what Hitler basically did. And he said one of the most difficult questions we're going to face in the future is what to do with the savage races. What's interesting as well is that you might think, you know, like some of us here who are a bit more lighter skinned or, you know, Turkish or whatever, you might think, we'll get away with Caucasians. Actually, you're not, because Darwin, when the Ottoman Muslims, the Turks, when they were fighting against the Europeans, they lost in a battle. So Darwin said, the reason why these savage Ottomans lost is because they're inferior race. So even though Turks are quite fair-skinned, they still weren't pure Caucasian. So even their loss in battle was supposed to be because of Darwin's theory of natural selection. So you're absolutely right. There's a whole historical reasons why this theory took off. In fact, according to let me try and think. According to Jerry Fodor, who's an atheist philosopher of science, he's got this book called What Darwin Got Wrong, right? Very well-known guy. He wrote this book with another atheist scientist. And in that book, they say, in our field of philosophy and science, you have to pledge your bay'ah, you have to pledge your allegiance to Darwinism, whether you understand it or not. And they don't believe in it, they reject it. But they said, this is how it's come to. And you will not find, and I'm going to throw this out as a challenge, Darwin's theory of evolution is the only scientific theory in history which has laws to protect it being taught, which has international treaties which Muslim countries have to teach it in their schools, which became into a political system, an ethical system, which became into a religious system, and also a theory which led to people losing their jobs who are secular, mainstream academics, purely for questioning it. Find a theory in the history of science where you question it and you lose your job. Also, one other thing, if that's not bad enough, find a theory in the history of science which has the amount of forgeries that Darwin's theory has. Where they've been caught red-handed, taking the skull of a human being, taking the skull of an orangutan, putting it together and using it for decades in central London in the museum. It's known as Piltdown, right? So that's my challenge, and you're absolutely right, Shoaib. There's a whole historical context to this. Yes?
My question is two parts. Number one, do you think this trend of atheism will come to an end? And secondly, for those people who are born into Muslims, who may be going down this path, how do we catch that? How do we stop it early? Because I've certainly noticed, especially within university. How do we stop that?
Okay, very good question. A few years ago, I sat down with Dr. Zubair Ashraf. Some of you might know him. He's a scholar in Pakistan. He's Dr. Farhad Hashmi's husband. And I was complaining to him exactly like you are about this whole issue, about the rise of secularism, the rise of atheism, people being affected by it. And it's a sociological thing. It's not a logical thing. It's literally like social proof. You know, people, there's two kebab shops, a whole bunch of people are gathered around one, another one, no one's there, everyone wants to go to that. It's purely a sociological thing, right? So I was explaining to him and I was complaining to him, and the great thing about the people of knowledge is that they'll give you a perspective that you never thought of, right? And they'll give you that. And he said to me in Urdu, he said to me, you know, like, son, don't worry. He says, we've been going 1400 years and we're strong. This is nothing. Yeah, just don't worry about it. And wallahi, first I used to be really worried. I was like, no, we need to educate our youth, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do this. But what I believe is that this rise is a means by which Allah wants us to become intellectually superior, so then we can actually advance Islam. And I think that's the way it's actually going to go. Because if you look at there was times in our history where Islam technically, logically could have ended. One of those times was actually during the Mongols, right? Now I want to ask you guys this question. If you have a country, and this country has a capital which is a garrison city, which has fortifications, which has army, military, satellites, everything, and say that capital is destroyed and taken over, and then there's a small village which is about 20 miles away. If you've taken the capital, can you not take the small village? Of course you can. Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, he sacked Baghdad, killed 1 million Muslims, threw all our books into the river Euphrates. He absolutely destroyed us. And that was the capital of the Muslims. What stopped him from going to destroy Makkah and Medina? Because Makkah and Medina were small, harmless cities which did not have defenses. Yet he is the only person in history, the Mongols are the only people in history who managed to get into a Muslim country, take down the Khalifa and murder the Khalifa. It's never happened in our history that an invading force did that. And when I read this, it shook me. Because I read this from, not from Muslim sources, but from non-Muslim sources. What stopped Hulagu Khan when he destroyed the Muslims in Baghdad? He could have gone straight to Medina. It's not that far. He didn't even need to go to Damascus. And they even occupied Damascus, as you know. Why didn't they destroy Medina and Makkah when Hulagu Khan wanted to destroy them? This is very important to understand.
Didn't he send an envoy to Cairo to the king of Egypt at the time, saying, surrender or we will overrun you? And the king just killed the envoy of Hulagu Khan, and then there was some death in the family of Genghis Khan, and Hulagu Khan had to go back.
There's other historical things that happened, but that's irrelevant to what I'm saying right now, which is they were in Baghdad, they destroyed the Muslims, they could have gone straight on.
Obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Of course. But what happened?
Same as the elephant.
Yeah. In Bukhara, which is the city of Imam Bukhari, Burq Khan, who was the first cousin of Hulugu Khan, who was a mushrik, as he was traveling through the city, he met a sheikh. And the sheikh gave him da'wah, while the Mongols had conquered the area. There and then, Burq Khan, a mushrik, became a mu'min. He became a believer. When he became a believer, he told his entire army, who were known as the Blue Horde, you become Muslim. When he discovered that Hulugu Khan has killed the Khalifa, he swore by Allah he's going to take revenge, and he used his army to attack his own cousin. And that's why Makkah and Medina was protected. One dawah conversation led to one conversion, led to an army's conversion, led to the first civil war amongst the Mongols, which protected Makkah and Medina. So this religion is strong. Don't worry about the rise of atheism, the rise of secularism. The only thing that we need to understand is this. Allah makes a promise in the Quran. And Allah makes this promise in the Quran 3 times. Not once, 3 times. Anyone want to guess what that promise is? And it's actually one of the verses where Sheikh Ahmad Didat said, you need to take this verse, you need to stick it in your head, you need to memorize it, and you need to use this as a driving force. No. That's good too, but that's not it. 3 times. And it's in Surah Muhammad. And the other 2 times I'm trying to remember where it was. It is He who is sent. It is He who sent His messenger with guidance in the religion of truth, so that it may prevail over all systems, all deens, and enough is Allah's witness. You know, when I read this verse, I think to myself, the question really is, are you going to be a part of that happening, or are you going to watch it happen? Because that's going to happen. It's absolutely going to happen. I myself, just yesterday, one of my friends, he was an atheist for 15 years. He was a militant atheist. You know, what I'm coming up with now, if he came here and he told you all the stuff he knew, right? Militant atheist for 15 years. What happened? And I want you guys to understand this. You know, during the Battle of the Trench, the Muslims were surrounded. Okay? One man, he went over the trench, he was a mushrik, and he became a Muslim. He went over and he said to the Prophet, I became Muslim, what shall I do? The Prophet said, go back and do something. So he sowed discord, which led to the tribes disappearing. Do you know what that man said? He said, that night, Allah threw Iman into my heart. Just threw Iman into my heart. And my friend who I was talking to you about, same thing. Militant atheist for 15 years. No God, fairy tales, we came here, we have a common ancestor with chimpanzees, religion is all nonsense. Militant atheist. Yet if you speak to him how he became Muslim, Allah just throws Iman in your heart. So, when we look at these things, we shouldn't be on the defensive. We should be on the offensive. We should be learning these types of content. And obviously, one thing which I have to say, which is extremely important, some people, they watch our videos, they watch particular Speaker's Corner videos, they watch debates, they get excited, they go pick up a book on philosophy, they go pick up a book on evolutionary biology, and they think that let me go out and debate someone. This is not the way to do it. Absolutely not the way to do it. What's the first book you need to read? Quran. I remember somebody who's very enthusiastic about dawah. He said to Abdurrahim Green, tell me what book I need to read, what book I need to read on philosophy, what book I need to read on biology, whatever, so that I can, take on atheism, take on this, take on that. Abdurrahim said to him, read the Quran in a language you understand, from beginning to end. When you finish reading it, go back to the beginning. When you finish reading it, go back to the beginning. Because that's the framework from which you see the world. You have to, very, very importantly, before you get involved in dawah, you have to have knowledge. And sometimes, some of the people who I know who got involved in dawah, they only got involved in dawah because somebody put a doubt in their head, then they had to learn their own religion, then they had to learn the arguments of the others, and then they had to oppose. So, they started on a defense and then they went on an offense. And that's what I would highly recommend, that everyone in this room, if you're not having a constant connection with the Quran, then you're someone who's bound to go into some sort of doubt. You're someone who's bound to get into some sort of trouble. Because that is the foundation from which you look at the world. Yes? Any other questions? Yes.
I remember reading some verse in the Quran where some of our generations from the past thousands of years were not able to understand a book like the Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent them messengers, but they were not fully. So does that mean that the human species itself is evolving in some ways to be able to understand things more complicated?
I don't know. And that's a dangerous topic for me to talk about. I'm not sure about that. That you have to ask, that's.
Is there a verse of the Quran then that says that, the people of the past were not able to understand the message?
I know what you're saying, and I know where you're coming from, and what you're actually referring to, but that's not something I can answer. Yes?
But a question about going back to you saying you were reading evolution in the Quran at the same time. So I think we have a number of young people here that that have studied philosophy, for example, looking at reviews of evolution. What is your advice? I know you covered it a few minutes ago, but what is your advice for them to actually, tackle this particular?
Well, the first thing I would say, for every single Muslim, they have to study Aqidah. The reason why, it sounds like a cliche, it sounds like it's an old record, people say you need to study Aqidah, they need to study Aqidah. Why? Because when you study Aqidah, one of the things that you actually realize is we don't believe in Allah because of some probabilistic argument. We don't believe in Allah because of some, miracle or whatever. We believe in Allah fundamentally because it's fitrah, right? And it's natural. And we also understand that human knowledge at best is a pixel. And Allah has the picture. And when you start on those assumptions, that look, because remember, every single worldview starts on assumptions. Today, when they teach philosophy, they're not actually teaching philosophy. They're not. You may go to Philosophy 101, they're not teaching philosophy. They're actually teaching a particular type of Western skepticism. That's what they're actually teaching. Philosophy just means way of thinking, right? Thinking about thinking. The Quran has its own type of philosophy, which starts off by the fitrah, right? So what we need to do is we need to understand our own belief, our own aqidah, our own tradition before we look at someone else's. Because one of the most dangerous things which can actually happen is when you debate someone, you step over the line and you step into their paradigm and you accept their assumptions. And that can be very dangerous. And many people, I know somebody who started studying philosophy and then said, I don't believe in fitrah. I believe in Allah because it's rational. You can't say that. Allah speaks about the fitrah in the Quran. And a lot of this is because of an inferiority complex. Yeah? We want to be. Did you know, this is very, very important. Which nation are we going to copy? And who? Who in particular? Bani Israel. Do you know Bani Israel, one of the things that they used to do and they still do, they used to take their Torah, not read it, wrap it up in silk cloth and put it in high places. Did you know that? Guess who else does that? Did you know they had a huge inferiority complex with the Greeks? Because the Greeks were superior intellectually, philosophically, scientifically, so the Jews felt inferior, to the point where they would undo their own circumcision. Look this up. They would try to undo their own circumcision because they wanted to follow the Greeks. Right? We as Muslims, we look at the Western world, we look at their scientific technology, we look at this, we look at that, and we have such an inferiority complex, we just try and follow them. But the reality is this. Muslims have been on this, we've been here since the beginning of time, but from the time of our last Prophet ﷺ till now, we were either the superpower or one of the superpowers. We were at the forefront of science, philosophy, mathematics, everything. Yes, we're having a slump right now, but that doesn't mean we follow them. Right? And this is where it's very, very important. So before, and this is something very, very important for everyone here, before you get excited and think, let me go and debate an atheist, let me learn some of these arguments and go refute them, let me do this, let me do that. First, learn your own religion. If you don't, you will go on the slippery path that others have gone in the past, and you'll start denying God. You'll start coming up with other sort of nonsense. Yeah? So this is the most important thing. Any other questions?
Last evolution question. One of the
I've got time, by the way, because Shoaib has got me here after a long time.
This kid over there sleeping, so I thought, you know, make it quick. So one of the reasons evolutionists, I find they're so confident, is because they say that the theory has the power to make predictions.
Yep.
So like say they have a tree of life and they think there should be a species here, then they find a fossil and it goes exactly where they think it should have gone. So they say, or like they say that the chimpanzee and the man has a common ancestor, but we're missing a chromosome if we had a common ancestor. And when they search, they find that chromosome. They go, see, we told you. It was like, for me, I find that quite powerful, that they can make predictions and it keeps, you know, being correct. And I'd feel a bit naive to kind of dismiss that and say, okay, you're based on assumptions, so I don't want to really address that. As a Muslim, I'd like to have some sort of an answer to that.
Okay, any scientific theory has predictive power. Any scientific theory, but it doesn't make it absolute.
Sure.